I still get goosebumps remembering that night. I was comfortably lying on the couch, watching some program on TV. My parents were getting ready to go out. They had an important dinner with some work colleagues. It wasn't the first time that I would be alone at home. After all, I was already 14 years old and I considered myself big enough for that. "Son, there's food in the microwave," my mother said, straightening her dress. "Let's not take long. Okay? Anything calls us." My father took the car keys and added, "Don't forget to lock everything. Champ. And no horror movies, you know how it goes later." I just nodded, not taking my eyes off the TV. I heard the door close and the sound of the car leaving. The house was silent except for the noise of the television. Everything was normal for the first few minutes. I got up just to get a soda from the fridge and went back to the couch. The show I was watching was getting boring, so I started flipping through the channels. That's when I heard the first noise. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. You know when you're alone and you start hearing things? But then the noise repeated, louder this time. It was coming from the kitchen, as if someone was rummaging through the cupboards. My heart sped up a little. It must just be the neighbor's cat, I thought to myself. Sometimes he would climb in through the kitchen window when it was open. But then I remembered we didn't have neighbors with cats. The noise continued, and now it sounded more like footsteps. Slow, heavy steps dragged across the kitchen floor. I swallowed hard, feeling butterflies in my stomach. Should I go check? Maybe it would be better to call my parents, but something inside me compelled me to investigate. After all, I wasn't a child anymore, right? What kind of teenager is afraid of noises at night? I got up from the couch, trying to make as little noise as possible. The hallway leading to the kitchen had never seemed so long and dark. Every step I took towards the kitchen seemed to make the floor creak louder than usual. My heart was beating so loudly that I was sure anyone, or anything, could hear it. The TV light, which was still on in the living room, created strange shadows on the walls. For a moment, I thought I saw a silhouette move, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. When I finally reached the kitchen entrance, my hand shook as I searched for the switch. Click. Nothing happened. I tried again. Click. Click. The light didn't come on. Great, I thought, feeling cold sweat run down the back of my neck. The only lighting came from the dim light from the street lamp, which came through the kitchen window, creating an even more frightening atmosphere. I forced my eyes to adapt to the darkness. The kitchen looked normal at first glance. The closed cupboards, the fridge humming softly, the table. It was then that I noticed something different on the table. There was a white paper on it, something that definitely wasn't there when I went to get the soda earlier. My legs shook as I approached. I took the paper with sweaty hands and held it close to the dim light coming from the window. My blood ran cold when I read the words written in irregular handwriting. "You forgot to lock the door." The paper fell from my shaking hands. No, it couldn't be. I clearly remembered hearing my parents closing the door as they left. Or could it be? A noise from upstairs made me catch my breath. It was as if someone was walking through the rooms. Slow, heavy steps making the ceiling creak. I didn't think twice. I ran towards the living room, my heart almost jumping out of my mouth. I needed to get my cell phone and call my parents, the police, anyone. But when I got to the room, I realized something was wrong. The TV was off. I hadn't turned off the TV. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the turned-off TV. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my heavy breathing and the uncontrolled beating of my heart. I frantically searched for my cell phone on the couch, among the cushions on the floor. It was nowhere. I was sure I had left it there, next to me while I watched TV. That's when I heard it. A laugh, low, almost a whisper, coming from the hallway that led to the bedrooms. It was a childish laugh, but there was something wrong with it. Something distorted, unnatural. "Looking for this?" A voice whispered, and my cell phone flew out of the dark hallway, landing at my feet. The screen was cracked and completely black. My legs gave way, and I fell onto the couch. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare, it had to be. In a few seconds, I would wake up, sweating but safe in my bed. But I didn't wake up. Instead, The lights in the room began to flicker, on off. Each time they lit up, I could see a different shadow in the hallway, getting closer and closer. League. The shadow was at the end of the corridor. Hangs up. My heart stopped for a second. League. The shadow was in the middle of the corridor. Hang up. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. League. The shadow was at the entrance to the room. And then all the lights went out for good. The darkness was absolute, but I could feel a presence. Something was there, watching me, reveling in my fear. The air turned cold, and I could see my own breath. You really should have locked the door, the voice whispered, now so close that I could feel its icy breath in my ear. On a desperate impulse, I jumped off the couch and ran toward the front door. My feet tripped over each other as I walked blindly across the room. The childish, distorted laughter followed me, echoing throughout the house. I finally reached the door and grabbed the handle. I turned it frantically, but it wouldn't move. It was locked. How could it be locked if I had forgotten to lock it? It's no use, the voice whispered, now coming from everywhere at once. I locked it for you. Wasn't that kind of me? Panic took over me completely. I started to knock on the door, scream for help, but my voice seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. It was as if the sound couldn't travel beyond the walls of the house. Suddenly, I felt something cold touch my shoulder. It wasn't a hand. It was something else, like several long, thin fingers, almost like tentacles. They started to wrap themselves around my neck. Let's play a game, the voice said, now deeper and more distorted. If you can find me, I'll let you out. If I find you first, well, you don't want to know. The tentacles released me abruptly, and I fell to the ground. Laughter echoed again, now coming from upstairs. Tick, the shadows on the walls seemed to move, dancing to the macabre rhythm of the clock. I knew I had no choice. If he wanted to survive, he would have to participate in that sick game. I stood up shakily, trying to control my heavy breathing. If I wanted to have any chance in this macabre game, I needed to stay calm and think clearly. The house has never looked so big and scary. Every room was now a potential hiding place for that thing. Every shadow could be a trap. The ticking of the clock continued, like a countdown to my destination. I decided to start downstairs. He walked close to the walls, trying to make as little noise as possible. The living room was empty, the kitchen too. When I got to the bathroom, I noticed something strange in the mirror. There were words written on it, as if someone had used their finger on the fogged glass. Is it hot or cold? Want a tip? At the same moment, all the taps in the house started to turn on by themselves. The sound of running water mixed with that childish and disturbing laughter. The water that came out was dark, almost black. Remember when you were little? The voice whispered. Remember your imaginary friend? My heart stopped for a second. How could that thing know about this? Little Tommy, the voice continued, who lived under your bed, who played with you when you were alone, who promised to never leave you. A flash of memory invaded my mind. I was 5 years old. Tommy was my imaginary friend, or at least that's what my parents said. But it became different over time, darker, scarier. Until one day you betrayed me. The voice roared, making the walls shake. You abandoned me for them. You left me alone in the darkness. The lights began to flicker violently, and I could see distorted reflections in the mirrors. A tall, thin creature with limbs too long to be human, glowing red eyes, and a smile full of sharp teeth. It was Tommy, but not the Tommy I knew as a child. It was something much more sinister, something that had grown and fed on all the darkness and loneliness all these years. Tommy, I whispered, my voice shaking. I was just a child. And what was I? The voice roared again, now much closer. I was your only real family. I protected you from real monsters. The mirrors began to crack, one by one, forming cobwebs on the glass. The cracks seemed to draw grotesque faces that stared at me and laughed. Memories that I had buried deep in my mind began to emerge. Tommy wasn't just an imaginary friend. He protected me when my parents fought. He comforted me when I cried alone in my room. He scared away the boys who bullied me at school. But then he started to change. He started suggesting bad things, showing me how to hurt the people who hurt me. That's when my parents took me to a psychologist and I was forced to grow up, to leave him behind. Do you think they love you? Tommy whispered, his voice now sounding like a mix of the child he was and the monster he has become. They left you alone today, like they always do, but I came back. I always come back for my friends. The ambient temperature plummeted. I could see my breath in the air, forming little clouds of vapor that seemed to dance in the dark. Suddenly, all the doors in the house began slamming violently, opening and closing at a frantic pace. The noise was deafening, mixed with Tommy's laughter and the sound of the dark water that continued to flow from the taps. "It's too late for excuses now," he said. "You've grown up, Tommy, and so have I." A gigantic shadow began to form on the ceiling, running down the walls like black, viscous paint. Tentacles of darkness writhed and stretched toward me. I ran towards the stairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. Darkness pursued me, consuming everything in its path. Where the tentacles touched, reality seemed to distort. "You can't get away from me," Tommy yelled, his voice making the windows vibrate. "I am part of you." I went into my room and locked the door, knowing it was useless. My old room where it all began. The posters on the walls began to melt, the colors running like fresh paint. The toys in the closet came to life, their eyes glowing with an evil red light. "Remember this place?" Tommy whispered, his voice now coming from inside my closet. "This is where we met. This is where we made our blood pact." Another repressed memory emerged. 5-year-old me making a small cut on my finger with paper scissors, while a shadow did the same. Friends forever, we had promised. The wardrobe began to shake and its doors opened violently. The darkness coming out of him was different. It was denser, older. It was the primordial darkness, the one that exists under children's beds and inside closed closets. "You broke our promise," Tommy said, emerging from the darkness. "Now it's my turn to break you." He was different than I remembered. I was no longer the friendly little shadow of my childhood. It was a tall, distorted creature, with long, disproportionate limbs, skin as pale as paper, and a smile that literally stretched from ear to ear, full of sharp, black teeth. His eyes were empty except for small red lights that seemed to pulse like heartbeats. "Tommy," I stuttered, cornered against the wall. "Please, please," he repeated, tilting his head at an impossible angle. "Please? Do you know how many years I waited in the dark? How many years I spent watching you grow up, forgetting you?" The tentacles of darkness grabbed me, lifting me off the ground. I could feel the cold of death in his touch, as if he was sucking out my very essence. "But I never completely abandoned you," Tommy continued, moving closer with his unnatural movements. "I was there, in the shadows of your nightmares, in the dark corners of your room, in the whispers you heard before going to sleep." He was so close now that I could see every detail of his deformed face. His skin had cracks, like broken porcelain, and through them I could see only darkness. "You know what's funniest?" he whispered, his breath cold on my face. "Your parents knew about me. They always knew. Why do you think they took you to that psychologist? Why do you think they always left the lights on?" More memories began to emerge. My parents' whispered conversations at night, the crucifixes hidden in my room, the prayers my mother said when she thought I was asleep. "But you can't banish a part of yourself, can you?" The tentacles tightened, and I felt like I was being pulled into the darkness itself. Reality began to distort around me, the room spinning like a macabre kaleidoscope. "Now," Tommy said, his smile widening even further, "let's finish what we started so many years ago. You're going to be my friend forever, whether you like it or not." At that moment, when everything seemed lost, something inside me changed. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was adrenaline, or maybe it was a sudden, terrifying realization. "You're right, Tommy," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "You're part of me, always have been." Tommy's smile faltered for a moment. The tentacles slightly loosened their grip. "And do you know what that means?" I continued. It means I'm part of you too. I closed my eyes and focused on all the memories. The moments of fear, of loneliness, of anger, but also the moments of joy, of love, of light. When I opened them again, I was the one smiling. If you can control me, I can control you. A deafening scream echoed through the house, but it wasn't mine. It was Tommy. The darkness began to waver, like a television with poor reception. "No," he roared. "You can't." But I could, because he was right, we were one. Every moment of fear in my life had fed it, had strengthened it. But every moment of courage was also mine. The darkness began to withdraw, and Tommy began to change. His distorted body grew smaller, his monstrous features softening. Soon, he was just a small shadow like the one I met so many years ago. "Please," he whispered, his voice now that of a scared child. "Don't leave me alone again." "You've never been alone," I replied. "You are my fear, my loneliness, my anger. But you are also my strength, my imagination, my courage. And it's time to accept that." I extended my hand toward him. Tommy hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. The moment we touched, a bright light filled the room. When I opened my eyes, I was alone in my room. The house was silent. The lights were on. Everything was in its place. But something had changed. I had changed. My parents found me sleeping on the couch when they returned. They never knew what happened that night. But sometimes, when the lights go out and the shadows lengthen, I can still hear a familiar whisper. And now I'm not afraid anymore, because I know that the shadows are part of me, just like the light. And it is only by accepting both that we can truly grow. And so we come to the end of this dark story. Or is we really coming? Because now, while you watch this video, be aware of you. These stories are not always on the screen. Sometimes they find a way of us follow to enter our minds. So if you hear a strange sound, if you notice an unexpected shadow or feel that invisible presence by your side, remember, it may just be your imagination, or maybe you have awakened something you shouldn't. If you have the courage, subscribe to the Portal of Horror to explore more dark mysteries. See you next time. Until there, and be careful what may be watching you.